Kenya Supreme Court says it cannot hear a last-minute petition to have the repeat presidential poll postponed. Chief Justice Maranga was unable to raise the necessary number of judges to hear the case. Only 2 of the 7 judges were in court. Human rights groups were seeking to delay the vote scheduled for Thursday. They argue that the Election Commission is not sufficiently prepared. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta has been adamant that the ballot must proceed. However, the main opposition leader, Raila Odinga, is boycotting the poll. And indeed, security has been the biggest worry of this extended election period. Kenya is determined to keep a lead on any trouble, and there's been a heavy security presence for months. But there's been a lot of controversy about the tactics. This report now from CGTN's Voldi Karese.
A record 150,000 security officers were deployed for the August polls, twice as many as during the last election in 2013. So when protests broke out after the vote, police were ready. They've been quick to react since then to the frequent protests called by the opposition. At least one security expert is impressed.
This time means that there is more order, there is more discipline, there's more training being demonstrated, and for us I think that's a very big positive. If we're to benchmark based on the performance in 2007 and 2008 compared to 2017, there are dramatic improvements with the behavior and the conduct of the Kenya and the National Police Service. We also see a lot of the use of new equipment, a lot more warning. We're seeing them also using the perimeters and the boundaries. We're seeing them allowing, for example, certain freedoms and rights not to be impinged on.
Even so, there have been deaths. Kenya's Human Rights Commission says more than 30 people have been killed since August 8. The victims include children. 9-year-old Stephanie Nyarangi was playing on this balcony when she was cut down, allegedly by a stray bullet. Rights groups are calling for greater restraint from police and politicians.
The issue of lack of accountability for some of the abuses the police have committed, and the fact that there is lack of political will to ensure that the police do not continue committing these abuses means that they will continue making these abuses.
Government has dismissed these allegations, and police initially denied using live rounds to quell protests. But they've now said at least 4 people have been killed in confrontations between demonstrators and police in October alone. Experts say security forces must stay within the law to avoid inflaming matters.
I think restraint, very important that all security forces in Kenya should put about as much restraint as possible from use of legal or what we call lawful force that they can execute.
Officials have called on all sides to behave, particularly around polling stations. They've made clear there will be zero tolerance for troublemakers come voting day. Voldi Karese, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, politics in Africa is never dull. But even so, few would have predicted the drama we've seen in Kenya these past few months, and it's far from over. So just how did Kenya get there? CGTN's Jen Keo has a story so far.
It was a fierce political contest from the word go. 8 candidates were on the ballot, but in reality, as with the 2013 election, the battle was between these 2, the incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, making his 4th attempt at the presidency. August 8th, the enthusiasm among Kenyan voters quite evident, with long queues across the country. For 3 days, Kenyatta maintains a 10% lead in the provisional results, relayed at the National Tallying Center.
I wish to declare Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta as President-elect.
3 days later, August 11th, IEBC, the Electoral Commission, declares Kenyatta winner by 54 to Odinga's 45%. Odinga immediately disputes the results as protests break out in opposition strongholds. A 9-year-old girl among the first casualties. August 19th, at the 11th hour, the opposition submits tens of thousands of documents as it files a petition at the Supreme Court. It claims the vote was rigged. 1st of September.
The presidential election held on 8th August 2017 was not conducted in accordance with the Constitution.
Odinga would score a victory in what would be an unprecedented decision, not just in Kenya, but Africa, as the Supreme Court nullifies the election, citing irregularities, and orders a new vote within 60 days. The reaction was immediate, with the president describing the Supreme Court judges as a bunch of crooks. On September 4th, the Electoral Commission announces the new vote will be on the 17th of October, but later moves it to the 26th, which is 5 days short of the 60-day deadline allowed by the Constitution. The Commission says it needs time to prepare.
Now, as far as we are concerned, it is not just the date.
There have been signs Odinga is not actually keen for a rerun. While Kenyatta has been traversing the country on the campaign trail, Odinga's side has barely held any kind of rallies.
After deliberating on our position,
on Tuesday, October 10th, Odinga withdraws, claiming the Electoral Commission has not reformed. Kenyatta says he is ready to proceed with a rerun. And then on October 11th, the High Court rules that the other candidates from August 8th should also be allowed to run.
Tabulating it to form.
With just a week to the poll on the 18th of October, IEBC Commissioner Roselyn Akombe resigns, saying a credible election is impossible. Hours later, the Commission's chair, Wafula Chebukati, says the Commission is all set.
Good afternoon.
But that he cannot guarantee the poll will be free and fair. Jane Kyo, CGTN.
And indeed, it's been action-packed drama since August the 8th when Kenya's Supreme Court annulled the presidential election. Let's get the latest now today. And I'm joined by CGTN's Jane Keo. She's live for us at Nairobi's Uhuru Park. Jane, first, you've been monitoring the Supreme Court this morning. The Supreme Court is yet again at the center of Kenya's political destiny. So what can you tell us? What's the latest there?
Well, Beatrice, like you mentioned, the lack of quorum by the Supreme Court judges simply meant that that case by the three voters seeking the cancellation of tomorrow's election could not be heard. Of course, the voters are basing their argument on the fact that they believe the IEBC is not really adequately prepared to handle the election tomorrow, and that public admission, that public statement by the IEBC chairman, Wafula Chebukati, last week, that he could not guarantee a free, fair and credible election. Now, only 2 out of the 7 judges showed up in court this morning. The Deputy Chief Justice bodyguard was shot yesterday, and the Chief Justice said that she could not make it in the court this morning, that she was not in a position to make it in court this morning. One other judge is still ailing, he's still bedridden. We were also told that another judge, Dongo, was out of town and she could not get a flight back into the city, while 2 other judges were simply said that they could not show up in court today. Now, of course, the decision has drawn mixed reactions and mixed views, particularly from the lawyers who are representing the 3 voters and the opposition lawyers. They say they are suspicious about the whole process. They believe that this was a well-calculated process, or rather a calculated strategy to derail and curtail the judicial process. In fact, they believe that the holiday today, remember today is a public holiday, was meant to curtail the judicial process. But what it essentially means, Beatrice, is that the election can go on as planned tomorrow, even though earlier today we also had the High Court rule that the appointment of the returning officers was illegal. Beatrice?
Jane, you're at Nairobi's Uhuru Park. They're quite near the CBD, the Central Business District. I can see some activity behind you. Could you just tell us briefly what's going on there? And then what is the immediate impact now of the IEBC getting the green light to organize the repeat presidential election?
Well, Beatrice, for now it means that the IEBC can carry on and organize tomorrow's election, even though there's still a lot of uncertainty. Don't forget that the IEBC itself is deeply divided. On the other hand, we've got one group of voters, a large majority of voters, saying that it's all systems go and they are ready to take part in tomorrow's election. On the other hand, we've got another majority, about 6 million voters, going by the number of votes that Raila Odinga garnered in the August election, saying that they will boycott the election. This morning, the opposition itself was saying that they will not be taking part in the election tomorrow. And what you're seeing behind me is a rally by the opposition. The opposition leaders are expected here any moment from now. Raila Odinga is said to be making what they are calling a major announcement. Their supporters, as you can see, are already making their way into the park here, to Uhuru Park. And of course, there's a heavy security deployment all around the park. So Beatrice, there's still a lot of uncertainty going forward. But moving on, we're likely to see protests even after tomorrow's election, and perhaps even more court cases.
Jane Keo joining us there with an update on Kenya's presidential elections, joining us there from Nairobi Central Business District. Well, let's give you some legal perspective now, and joining me in studio is Sandra Ochola. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Sandra, thank you for joining us here on Africa. It's been a dramatic morning in Kenya, of course, and a dramatic 2 months since the announcement of the presidential poll. First, what's your reactions to the development in the Supreme Court today, particularly to the fact that only 2 Supreme Court judges showed up for the case that was filed by the petitioners?
Yes, the case that was before the Supreme Court was a case seeking the nullification of, not the nullification rather, but the petitioners to the case were asking the court to give orders to stop the elections that are set for October 26th, that's tomorrow. However, as you've rightly said, only 2 judges were available, and so the Chief Justice was not able to go on with the case because of lack of quorum. Looked at in various perspectives, from a legal perspective, yes, I think it was a wise decision given the gravity of the issues that we are dealing with. It was important for the Chief Justice to undertake this case, or to listen to this case with enough quorum, given how heavy the situation we are dealing with is at now. From a political perspective, others could also see it as a wise decision in terms of reading the mood of the public, and also keeping in mind that it was the same Supreme Court that had ordered that we go back to a new election in 60 days, and so giving a decision that would have contravened its earlier ruling could have been interpreted in one way or another that it was aligning itself to one political party. So I think from my perspective as a lawyer, it was a very wise decision given what we are dealing with. It followed the legal processes. It has kept in tune with what the Constitution provides, and given Kenyans an opportunity to go through the legal process of holding an election tomorrow. It does look like it's all systems go now for a presidential election for Kenya on Thursday. But of course, bearing in mind that the leading, another presidential contender, Raila Odinga, will be boycotting, or has mentioned that he will be boycotting the election on Thursday. Now, that leaves some sort of legitimacy question, does it? What does it imply, though, for the other contenders in terms of legitimacy? I look at it from 3 perspectives. One, Raila Odinga has every right not to participate in an election, which is something that he is exercising, despite not the IBC saying that it hasn't signed a number of forms to ensure that he's officially out of the race. And we've also seen on various accounts where he's still very interested in the issues that are going on with this election. However, the question I'll ask on that perspective, what exactly determines the legitimacy of a government? Is it numbers, or is it the feelings of those people who might feel disenfranchised through this process? If it is about numbers, what our laws provides is that within such experiences, a president should be elected with a 50+1 majority. So what we are hoping for, and what we have seen most of the Jubilee politicians talking about, is that they're hoping for a huge turnout to ensure that there's going to be that 50+1 or majority, so to speak, turnout, to ensure that from a legal perspective, from a numbers perspective, then the president will have met those requirements in terms of how many people will have come out and voted for him. But then now on the question of feelings as to whether there are certain sections of the country that are going to feel disenfranchised with the conducting of this process, then from my perspective, that is a discussion that we are going to have after tomorrow, because then it behoves upon the individual that will be elected to now find means and ways of ensuring that even those people who might have felt that they did not want to participate in this election, you find means and ways of bringing people together. And also tied to that is the fact that there are other candidates on the ballot paper. Remember, there was a case that a High Court ruling or a High Court decision that ensured that now all the other parties that participated in the past election are now again contenders in this election. So perhaps what we need to dissuade ourselves from is looking at this election from a two-people perspective and ensuring that we're also giving the other candidates the type of legitimacy and publicity that they deserve moving forward for this election.
So if we look at this away from the two-people perspective here, and if a rerun does go ahead as scheduled on Thursday, and if the opposition party of Raila Odinga does boycott that election as they have indicated, what kind of legal challenges, though, will we be looking at moving forward? Very briefly.
The legal challenges that might arise, and still borrowing from the decision by the Supreme Court that realized certain irregularities and illegalities that took place. Perhaps now, moving forward, it will now be upon us again to go to court and prove that there are certain irregularities and illegalities that took place during this process. However, there are certain issues that might arise as regards the committing election offences by certain quarters, not only within the IBC, but also with supporters from the NASA side. Because what we have seen are two differences in choices. You have individuals who are saying we'll boycott the elections, but then you have others who are very keen on sabotaging the election. So what we are hoping for is that after this election process, it's their constitutional right to go ahead and petition the results, but then it must also be backed up with good legal reasoning, and reasoning that comes from a point of good faith, given the political situation that you're having.
Right, Sandra Ochola, thank you very much for your insights on Kenya's election. And we are staying on that election for the moment. We can now cross over to Susan Mwangeli. She's joining me from Kisumu, which is the stronghold of opposition leader Raila Odinga. Susan, the Supreme Court this morning did not make any ruling regarding tomorrow's election there. Kisumu is an opposition stronghold and has very much been in the limelight in terms of making or demonstrating against the Electoral Commission there. What can you tell us about the situation in Kisumu at the moment?
Well, Beatrice, the situation is very tense, and it has been tense for the last 1.5 hours, which is contrary to what we woke up to this morning. Things were moving fine, though it was calm, businesses were up and running, but immediately there were reports that the Supreme Court lacked quorum, then all hell broke loose. We had hundreds going to the streets protesting, saying that there will be no elections, and saying that the IBC must postpone these elections. And really, there was a lot of frustration with these people marching to the IBC offices. There was a lot of frustration. It seems that they had pegged a lot of hope on the Supreme Court ruling, which they hoped would rule in their favor like it did last time. So basically what we've seen the march all the way to the IEBC, where they gathered here, and they were addressed by the political leaders who called on them to maintain the momentum, that there will be no elections. And basically after here, they've moved to Kondele, and in Kondele they're waiting for that all-important announcement that Baba, who is the opposition leader, Raila Odinga, is set to announce shortly. So that is what they're waiting for. But basically the protests were peaceful. As much as there was a lot of emotions, they were peaceful. The police were out there watching from a distance. And the thing is, with this protest in Kisumu, it begins rather peacefully, but we don't know what to expect much later. So we just wait and see. But so far there haven't been any incidents. But given how spontaneous Kisumu is, we can only wait and see.
Right, Susan Mwangeli joining us there from Kisumu with an update.